I am extremely happy and grateful for Jayson Gaignard to take the time to be the guest for this episode 100. You will hear his story. Is absolutely phenomenal, inspiring person, a great human being. Enjoy this episode with Jayson Gaignard. Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Business of Meeting podcast. And this episode is absolutely unexpected and very expected at the same time because it's episode 100. And I wanted to invite somebody that you've heard if you've been listening to the previous episode. I don't know how many times I've mentioned his name. I don't know how many times I've mentioned the Champagne Cash question. He is an amazing individual, a fabulous entrepreneur. He has created my favorite community in the world called MMT. Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Jayson Gaignard. How are you, my friend?
Thank you for having me. I got to say, I've had a handful of friends that were interviewed by you on the podcast. And I was always wondering, I'm like, is he ever going to reach out to me? And I felt left out. So I'm glad that you kept it in your back pocket to have me here for episode 100. And it's an opportunity I don't take lightly. So hopefully I can deliver. I'm
sure. And I'm so grateful you're taking the time. And for those who don't know you, they're up to a treat because what you've done in your life is just absolutely amazing. Why don't we start with maybe not the beginning, but what's your story?
Yeah, well, the short version is I dropped out of high school, wasn't much of an academic, and I started a service-based business. The business back then was I had a personal concierge firm. So I'd run errands for people. Our slogan was, if it was legal, moral, and would save you time, we'd take care of it. So I did everything from grocery shopping to I had one client hire me to bring a box of his ex-girlfriend's stuff to her door and break up with her effectively. So did that for some time and then realized that service-based businesses are hard to scale. So I pivoted into an online product business, which I grew to about $6 million a year over 4 years with no outside investments. I was traveling the world, making a ton of money, but with all that money and all that free time, I started to ask myself questions like, why am I here? Will I be remembered? How many people show up to my funeral? And I was not happy with the answers I was giving myself. And I realized that money and happiness scale very differently. At that point, I was earning what I calculated to be 22 times the national average income. And in most business circles, that would be celebrated, but it was bothersome to me because I'm not 22 times happier than the average male. I'm not 22 times healthier. I actually had kidney complications because of stress at the age of 23. Oh. And there's a saying that when one door closes, another one opens, but it sucks to be stuck in the hallway. For me, I didn't feel in alignment with the work that I was doing anymore. And ultimately, as we kind of shared offline, I built a business I hated to enable me to buy things I didn't need to impress people I didn't like. So I knew I had to transition out of that. Didn't know what I was going to lean into next. The goal was to scale that business down to zero. I could have sold it, but when I realized my heart wasn't in it, I couldn't, position the business for sale and do some kind of earn out and ultimately be in the business for another 2-3 years. So decided to scale it down to zero. Unfortunately, things did not go as planned. Which is a common theme, recurring theme in my life. And when the dust settled, I was basically $250,000 in cash debt in August of 2012.
Wow.
And no business, no cash flow, didn't know what I was going to do next. And I had an opportunity kind of fall in my lap about a month or two later, where a friend of mine who I met at an event, this was very much a loose friend. It was somebody we connected at an event and then didn't really stay in touch with after that. But she posted on social media, she had an extra ticket to go see Seth Godin in New York to participate in one of his workshops. And I had no other obligations at the time. And I've always been a big fan of Seth's work. And so I said, I'll take the ticket. I didn't know what the event was about or what the workshop was about, but it turned out the theme of it was the connection economy and how there's huge value connecting like-minded individuals. And at the time, I felt very isolated and alone, one could say. So I came back on my flight. I was like, I'm going to start hosting dinners and bring together like fascinating people and just be a fly on the wall. There's a saying that if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Yep.
When I was putting on these dinners, I was definitely not the smartest person in the room. But that first dinner I did, I almost canceled 2 hours prior because I'm like, nobody's going to see value in this. They're going to think I completely wasted their time. But thankfully, it turned out to be a great success. The conversation didn't skip a beat for 4.5 hours. And I got clarity that being in the presence of fascinating people and just creating that container for that to happen was something I want to do to some capacity for the rest of my life. And not as a business, because I was actually paying for these dinners out of pocket. And the reason for that, because people thought it was crazy, that like I didn't know how I was going to make rent that month, but I was paying for these dinners. At the time, we were considering bankruptcy. And my reasoning was that the bank could take my car, they could take whatever measly assets I had left, but they couldn't take my relationships. Investing in myself and investing in my relationships were the safest investment I could make. Beautiful. So I continued on with these dinners for maybe about a month. And then I had an opportunity that I want to say fell in my lap, but there's a friend of mine named Tim Ferriss, who's well known in business circles. He wrote a book called The 4 Hour Work Week and The 4 Hour Body and The 4 Hour Chef, which are all New York Times bestsellers. But in advance of his 4 Hour Chef book, he found out a few weeks prior of the book release that he was going to be banned from all retail distribution, Barnes and Noble, Walmart, everyone. And the reason for that yes, good question. A lot of people have that question. And the reason is actually because he was the first big name author to publish through Amazon. And the old traditional, publishing arm almost wanted to make an example out of him. And Tim is probably one of the most creative individuals I know. And what he did to kind of combat that, so to speak, was he did this book bundle campaign where if you bought 10 books, maybe you get some additional resources. If you bought 50 books, I don't know, maybe you get a blender. I don't know. But he had this Hail Mary package, this long shot package that if you bought 4,000 books, he'd do 2 speaking engagements. And at the time, I was one of the first people to see this opportunity. He was only offering 1 package. And I reached out to a friend of mine that does these big events in Canada. They're big leadership events. They do probably about 9 a year. And they'll have thousands of people that show up to these events, business events, leadership events, that kind of stuff. And I sent him an email and I said, this is a great opportunity for you. And the minute I click send on that email, I said, this is a great opportunity for anyone because Tim's never spoken in Canada where I'm based out of, and he doesn't speak all that much. So I ended up messaging Tim and I said, I'll take the books. I'll take the package. And the challenging part, was that.
Did you know him?
So I knew Tim because I went to one of his events that he hosted in 2011. So he held an event in 2011 called Opening the Kimono. And it was an event that was capped at roughly 100 people. And it was geared towards authors who wanted to become New York Times bestselling author. And I never had the intention of becoming an author, but it was $10,000 to go for 2 days. And that was like 20 times more than I've ever spent to go to an event. But for me, I guess my reasoning or the way I was looking at it was that at $10,000, there's bound to be some really interesting people there. And I was kind of leaning into like, I'm not liking the work I'm doing and that kind of stuff. Maybe who knows what can come from this. I just felt drawn to it. So that's why I met Tim. And that's also where I met the lady that led to the opportunity for me to see Seth Godin. So that event, because I know, we talk a lot about obviously meetings and events and that kind of stuff, fundamentally shifted and changed the direction of my life. Because you fast forward a little bit when I had those books with Tim, where I had to basically come up with $84,000 in 3 days to buy those books, wow. Which is another story, but led to MMT. And for us with Mastermind Talks, I just planned to do one event. I guess the way I looked at it was if I could bring 100 amazing people together, I just added and break even. I just added 100 amazing people to my peer group. So that was the spirit as far as how we did MMT.
Awesome. Jayson, if I may, just before we go on with MMT, I just want to finish the Tim Ferriss story because I think it's so inspiring and so risk-taking. So you have depth. You are reaching out to somebody you've met before to buy this package of $84,000. And what's happening at that moment? What do you feel and what are you thinking that you decide to do that despite the environment, which probably not very supportive at that time, or you're not in the best, in the best situation to make such investment?
Yeah. So it's funny. I mean, again, I was in a bad spot emotionally, spiritually, financially, physically, not in a good space. And I was spiraling downwards. I wasn't going up, I was going down. And one of the distinctions that I made, especially when that opportunity came up, was what made me quote unquote successful in the first place in my previous venture was I constantly stretched myself. So there's this philosophy of like there's stress and then there's eustress, and eustress is a Greek word and it's basically healthy stress, one could say. So I built my last business on credit cards. So I would put like $200,000 of product on a credit card with $0 in the bank. And I knew I had to sell that $200,000 in order to pay the credit card the following month. So that's how I grew my last business. And then when I found myself in that kind of time of transition, I had this innate kind of feeling that like I needed to stretch myself to get out of it. I work best with my back against the wall, which is both good and not good to a certain degree. But understanding that was my operating system at the time, this was my chance to do it. So committing to coming to the table with $84,000 when I never raised money before in the past. I grew up with, I guess, this thought process that like my father is a very proud individual and never asked for anything and that kind of stuff. So that was instilled in me. So the idea of asking friends if they would be interested in contributing up to $84,000 to buy these books with no business idea, no business plan, no experience as far as hosting events. It was quite a stretch. But I reached out to 3 friends. The first one said, hey, like, let's talk numbers. And I'm like, I can't even talk numbers because I don't know anything about events, but I'll loop back with you. The second person said, let's start a business together 50-50. And the third person, I was halfway through the pitch. And he said, come to my office tomorrow morning to pick up the check. And I didn't finish the pitch. I'm like, I don't want to give him any reason to say no. I went to his office the following morning and I got the check and sent it off to Tim. And then after we had the first event, I reached back out to that guy because we never talked about repayment terms. We didn't talk about like what this looked like. And I asked like, why did you give me the money? Because on paper it's the worst investment you could possibly make. And he said, I wasn't investing in the business. I was investing in you. And at that point in time, 2 things became very clear. You never know the value of your relationships until you really need it. And when you hit rock bottom, you'll be left with your word and your relationships. So never tarnish your word and always invest in your relationships.
And if I may add a third one, is that sometimes we need other people to realize the value we have.
That's a good one. I'm going to add that. Well, that's a good one. Gave me chills. You're good. You're good. I like that one.
And it's because from all the several years I know you're somebody extremely humble. You never put yourself forward, despite probably what I call the North American culture, which is very, I always laugh when people say this, the greatest in the world. You go here to the how do you call it? The store where you buy food. What is the deli? And it's the greatest deli in the world. I mean, they've never been out of the US, but it's the greatest deli in the world.
Yeah.
And the opposite is people like you and probably a little bit like me as well, where we know our value, but it's maybe through the others that we realize the great things we can be doing. So thank you for sharing that story. I think it's very inspiring for a lot of people listening.
Yeah, no, it's it's an interesting distinction. And I pride myself. A lot of people look to me and I guess my views on relationships and forging relationships and that kind of stuff. And I actually just delivered a talk last week at an event in Toronto here. And, I think one of the biggest message I could kind of hit home with that audience is that everybody wants to be connected with like all the big names. And for me, what excites me the most is finding that person that maybe is low confidence or is that diamond in the rough and investing in them, because amazing people become increasingly amazing over time. And I love being able to identify that in people and being able to add fuel to their journey. So, and that's what that individual, did for me 8-9 years ago now. So wouldn't be here without it. That's for sure.
And so that person believe in you. You do this first event. You want to have like 100 people. How does the first event go? How do people register? What's the deal with Tim Ferriss? And what other speakers are coming? And I mean, so many other questions, but I'll let you answer those first.
No, well, I mean, so basically, I had no money. So ignorance, confidence, and hard work can go a long way. That's the container that I probably would like to start the conversation for that first event. I didn't know how to put on an event. As a result, MMT that first year and every year since subsequent year is closer to like a wedding than it is a conference, just like the high touch nature and that kind of stuff. And that was really apparent in year one. I didn't have money to pay speakers. That was a problem because I needed speakers to draw, an audience. So what I did, I took a page out of Peter Diamandis' X Prize, and I did a prize for the best talk as voted by the audience. It was a $25,000 prize. And the funny thing is I was able to draw like $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, per speaking engagement speakers to compete for a $25,000 prize. It was one year specifically, there was a speaker that charged, a significant amount of money, and he had a conflicting event. He was supposed to go for a paid engagement, but he was so sure he was going to win MMT that like he went that for a smaller potential prize, which he didn't end up winning. But for that first event specifically, I had two approaches. One, again, I did the X Prize model to do a prize for the best talk as voted by the audience. And I also had Tim as the anchor speaker. So there's this philosophy in real estate around like anchor tenants if you're in commercial real estate. So if you have a mall and it's not necessarily a great mall, if you bring an Apple store, you'll probably get a Nordstrom's, and you may get a Cheesecake Factory. And then all of a sudden it just completely changes the perception of the mall. For me, I had Tim as my main speaker, and I knew I could get people to speak at the event for free or to compete for this prize who wanted to be connected with Tim, or they're already friends with Tim, but they're never at the same place at the same time. And that's how we ultimately were able to bring together 15 speakers for that first event, many who are like TED speakers and that kind of stuff. And the funny thing is, just looping back to that event that Tim did in 2011, which fundamentally changed my life, 4 speakers who spoke at MMT were people I met at that event in 2011.
Wow.
So that's how we got the speakers effectively. And then once we had the speakers, we were able to draw an audience. And I think I took a screenshot of the landing page. It was brutal. I would not have spent any time or money going to this event. It was horrible. But the one thing I did that worked was I recorded a video. It was a black and white video. And the spirit of the video was very much Simon Sinek's, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And I shared very honestly why I was doing this event. And I just made mention of like isolation and amazing people are hard to come by, and I want to bring people together. And that spoke to the right person. And that for that first event, we actually had 4,200 entrepreneurs apply for it, which I wasn't expecting.
4,200.
Yeah. And that was as a result of, I was able to get, again, because I came from a place of, I guess, honesty, and the speakers could see that they wanted to support. They use their social media channels to kind of promote the event. And a lot of like when Tim did it, like he was getting comments of like, is this a scam? Because they had this big name speaker, Tim, and then they go on the landing page and they're like, this looks like junk. Like this doesn't look like a professional website or a professional event. So he was actually getting a lot of people, pushing back of like, is this a scam? But so we got a lot of support for that first event. So yeah, 4,200 entrepreneurs apply. And then, as you know, we take curation very seriously. So for that first event, I actually refunded $48,000 in paid tickets for people that I did not think were going to be a fit. And I didn't know if that level of curation would pay off, but that has ultimately been our secret sauce for the last 8 years, has been our curation process.
Definitely, man. When you get this first event, so you have 4,200 applications, and you have 100 seats available?
Yeah, that venue capacity was about 140, 150.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is the process you put in place then? Or did you from day one had a curation process in place, or when you were confronted to those 4,200, you're thinking, oh, how am I going to select people? You cannot interview 4,200 people.
Yeah. Well, as you may remember, my landing page was terrible, meaning I didn't put a lot of thought into much.
I don't know. I didn't know you at that time. So
no, I know. But like that was an indication of when people started to apply. I'm like, how am I going to curate? I haven't thought this through. I belonged to other organizations before that we're both familiar with, where curation is done based on demographics. Your business has to be a certain size. Maybe your business is in a certain industry. And in hindsight, I was lucky because I came from an industry of e-commerce, and I got to a point where I was jaded by with the business I was doing. And as a result, didn't like the people I was serving. So I would have people, call up with credit card in hand to purchase, and I wouldn't answer the phone because I'm like, I just don't want to deal with these people. So to go from that business, from a contrast perspective, to like a blank slate of MMT, again, I wasn't doing this to be a business. I was doing this as this is a project I can focus on for the next 6 months to just at least let me move into a positive space where I can start my next business afterwards. Maybe it's another e-commerce business or something. And ultimately, how the process worked back then is these applications came in. And again, I was not expecting, all these applications, but they came in. If I reviewed an application and I felt like somebody was a right fit, so I did research on their company or went on their website and that kind of stuff, I'd extend an invitation. If they claim that invitation, then I would hold a phone call with them. And on that phone call, I would try to assess, are they a fit or not? And ultimately, again, keeping as a frame of reference, like demographics is how other organizations do it. And you and I have been part of these groups and these organizations, or have met very successful people on paper that have $100 million businesses, but you wouldn't want to have coffee with them, right? You're just, there's not an alignment of values. What they value, it may not be what you value. So ultimately, when I was considering somebody for MMT, at the end of my interaction with them, I'd ask myself, would I want to have dinner with this person? And if the answer was no, I didn't care how successful they were on paper or the number of Twitter followers they had back then, or whatever the case may be, I'd refund their money. And ultimately, that's a question of, is there an alignment of values? I've come to learn that, and that's been a key to bringing our curation process to light to some degree. But that was really how I curated for the first handful of years. Is I was the bottleneck to the curation process, and I had after every single interaction, I'd ask myself, would I want to have dinner with this person?
Fascinating. And I must say, I was very lucky a few years ago to meet John Rulin, who introduced me to you and to MMT, which I love. My father used to say the proportion of stupid people is the same in every organization at every level. And if it was still in this world, I would say, but in MMT, because of that curation. And so that's something that you just mentioned, I think is very important, is the alignment with values. And if you see the number of conference, the number of organization, especially now, after COVID and what are we going to do? And they might be tempted by basically making the numbers instead of first looking at their value, the purpose, and if there's an alignment. And your example is the perfect proof that in the long term, there is nothing better.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen that as a result of our own kind of battle with COVID, how the community has kind of stepped up for us. But I mean, one of my distinctions years ago was, and I'll tell you how we got onto this whole values as part of the curation process. It was as a result of, I went to one of our MMT members. We used to do, and we still do from time to time, a lot of, it's all peer-to-peer learning. And what we would do sometimes is like behind the scenes tours of other business owners' businesses. And there's one gentleman in our community has a company that he took over. It's a family business. They've been in business for over 30 years, and they have an incredible culture. And this guy is like one of the sweetest guys I know. And we're doing this tour around company culture. And I asked him, and I was having a struggle because it's not uncommon for us to remove people from the community. Every once in a while you have conflicts. Every once in a while we're dealing with humans. Humans are messy. So for me, I never want to expose the community to somebody who's a liability. So there's many times over the years where I've had to remove people. All that to say though, I was in conversation with this friend of mine, and I said, "You're the nicest person I've ever met. How do you fire people?" because you're so nice and everybody loves you.
Mm.
And he said, our core values are so clear that by the time someone sits down with me, they already know what core value they broke. Mm. And I was like, that's what we need. Like we need that. Like, I don't want to be the bad guy to say I have to kick you out of, our community. I just want to be able to point and people know. And really my discovery from that point onwards is that how you run a community of 150 people, 300 people, 500 people is exactly how you'd run a company of the same size. The importance of core values and keeping those front and center, and like considering, or, in a company you're hiring based on core values, because somebody could have incredible skill set and they're great in the short term, but inevitably it never works out. Right. So using that as like the filter to consider new people for your community or for your event, and then using that as the benchmark of, when people are in the community, you're either coaching them up or coaching them out based on those values. So I've drawn a lot of inspiration digging into like a lot of books on like culture and that kind of stuff, because the things I work with in organizations of X amount, like X size, works beautifully when you want to forge an incredible community.
And so I'd like you to speak a little bit more about how you align the curation outcome, so that the people are coming, and how you build the event. Because both of us have been to many conferences and events in our lives. What I think is absolutely unique in your community, in your event, in the annual MMT conference, is the detail, the level of detail, where you even gonna go. We know that we're sitting next to someone because somehow Jayson Gaignard and his team find out there's a commonalities that we have to find, but for every single meal. It's just insane when you think about it, and great. So for those who are listening and are in our industry, how do you link the curation and the process and the design of the conference itself?
Yeah. So, for us, we're really have made a big stride in kind of capturing relationship intelligence or member intelligence, one could say. So, whether it be when somebody's being considered for MMT and they're going into an exploration call, there's an intake form. If somebody's coming to a live experience, there's another intake form. These intake forms can be rather comprehensive, but we refine them significantly over the years. And I know you're smiling because some people hate them, and I get it. I get it. It's so funny because there's maybe 60 questions on our intake forms, and we use a platform called Typeform to collect the responses. Mm-hmm. And I know, like, I've actually done a screen record, and it can take, if you focus, it'll take 15 minutes. But it gives us an average of how long it takes on average, our community members to fill out the form. And it's something like the average person is like 300 and something minutes, because they do a little bit and then they open another screen and fall down another rabbit hole or what have you. But it gives us the information we need to design an incredible experience for them. Traditionally, when you look at event planning or putting on an event, you find speakers and those speakers draw an audience, right? For us, what we do is we draw an audience, or we bring together a collection of individuals, get clear on their needs, where they are, where they want to go. And then we design content, let's say, to serve those needs. So we kind of approach it the other way around. So we're blessed to have a lot of, again, this relationship intelligence. And then we can apply that when it comes to picking the format or designing the format of the event, picking speakers, different tracks, and all the way down to assigned seating. So really, assigned seating is done in many different ways, but it is one of the things that people enjoy most about our MMT live experiences is stuff like the assigned seating. And assigned seating is done based on uncommon commonalities. So as a general rule of thumb, like the stronger the uncommon commonality that two people share, the stronger the bond. Mm-hmm. So we're bringing together a group of entrepreneurs with similar values. Like that is a pretty strong uncommon commonality. But if I find out two people are avid mountain bikers, I'll sit them next to each other at dinner. Or if I find out one person is struggling with culture in their business and the other person is world-class at culture, I'll sit them next to each other. And it's become this interesting energy when you come to an MMT event now, because you're trying to figure out why you're seated next to the person you're seated to, because you know that there is thought kind of behind it. So something we're always trying to kind of refine. But there's a balance of like high touch and everything scheduled and all that kind of stuff. And then also creating space for serendipity and space for things to breathe. And that's been a balance we've been trying to achieve. And I think we did with our last live experience. I mean, that's the closest we've ever got. And the approval rating for that event was a 9.90 out of 10. And the funny thing is, reviewing feedback from that event, I'm like, based on what I know, we can make our next event a 12 out of 10. But yeah, I mean, people definitely enjoy the high touch nature of the work.
Absolutely. It's funny because from the very first conference, every conference I had the opportunity to attend. So where are you going? I said, MMT conference. So who's attending? I said, I don't know. Who's speaking? I don't know. What's the program? I have no idea. So why are you so excited? Say, well, it's kind of funny. So over the years, I'm curious when, I know you go very deep in the question. By the way, I'm the one who is completely destroying your average time, not only because of my ADD, but I take more than 15 minutes to answer. But over the years, with all those intake forms, have you noticed any trends, any change in what people are, what's important for people, what matters for people over the years? Have you found out any change with that, an evolution with the people attending?
Yeah, I mean, we've never calculated and it's a little challenging because it's a smaller kind of sample set, one could say, but like the lifetime value of like a member, because we still have members that have been with us since day one. And the interesting thing about that first event, because of our curation, we had 15 speakers. That first event, 10 came back as paid attendees the following year. And many of them are still paid attendees to this day. So we don't know exactly what our lifetime value is. But I mean, I've been able to see the evolution of a lot of these kind of individuals. And our curation has gotten tighter, right? The who we served back then is different than kind of who we serve now. And our growth, the way we've grown the organization is very different than most. Usually when you have success in the events business, the natural tendency to scale is more events or bigger events. And for us, instead of scaling in size every year, we've scaled by raising the caliber of people in attendance. So just because you were allowed last year doesn't mean you're necessarily allowed back. And by raising the price point. So that first event I was telling you about, I know you're a paying member of MMT. This may throw salt in the wound, but that first event was $1,000, and then went up to 3,000, 5,000, 10,000.
I wish I would have bought a lifetime membership at that price. But I forgot there is no lifetime membership.
You took advantage of our most recent credit thing, which is something we could talk about because that's been amazing. The amount of people that have invested for 5 years out. But yeah.
So when you see all those people that are coming, and let's face it, it's first of all because of you and what you put together. And those last 2 years, there is no live event. So where does Jayson Gaignard takes his energy from? And what have you done the last 2 years? Because that's, I think, something that will resonate with a lot of people listening.
Yeah. I mean, listen, the event industry has been obviously decimated in some regard when it comes to the pandemic. And, given our business model, all of our revenue historically was tied to one event a year. So one could say that is a very fragile model in an environment where there's a pandemic. So for us, we had an event slated for June of 2020. In March of 2020, we somewhat got ahead of it as much as we could. I think it was April 1st or April 2nd. We made an announcement to the community that we were going to postpone our event a full calendar year. At the time, a lot of people thought that was crazy, including myself, because the energy around the pandemic was we're going to do this 14-day quarantine, and then the pandemic's behind us.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to disrupt the community anymore. I didn't want to disrupt the business anymore. I saw it as a chance for us to, with all this free time, so to speak, focus on ways for us to come up with new ways effectively to better serve the community in a remote fashion and work on parts of the business that I've always wanted to work on, but I never had the time. So we saw it on some level as a blessing. And then we put it out to the community saying, hey, you can either take a full refund or move your spot to a full calendar year to 2021. And just give a lay of the land, like back in March of 2020, this is when like a lot of people in our community thought they were losing their businesses, right? Like they were laying off all their staff. There was a tremendous amount of uncertainty as far as like, are we leading into a recession, a depression? What does this look like? Thankfully, when we're given that opportunity to either keep their spot or take a full refund, every single member decided to transfer their spot a full calendar year, which was huge. If we had 30, 40% of our membership or our clients, so to speak, request a refund, we'd be out of business. So to have that level of like loyalty and support was huge. Funny thing is as we leaned into 2021, as you know, we had to move the event again, a full calendar year. And yet again, every single person, transferred their spot. So it's been a blessing. But I mean, the first 2 quarters of 2020, or since when the pandemic hit, our revenue was down 99.5%. Over an 18-month period, our revenue was down 92%. So it's been a bumpy road. I found myself back in that hallway that I talked about earlier. Yeah. But I mean, with the loyalty and support of our community, it's been manageable.
And how do you get what drives your energy? What get you excited? And how did you manage to maintain your motivation the last 2 years?
Honestly, it's tough. I'm in a unique position where 95% of my social time, digitally or in person, is with people in the community. I often share that we have 150 people within MMT. I'd have 140 of those people to my wedding. I mean, these are my favorite people. So, although there's definitely moments where I was like, this is not going in a good direction, I should pack it up. Because ultimately, the visual I can just share, and you can appreciate this as a business owner and navigating this landscape, is I felt like I was driving a car and I had my family in the backseat and I had my team behind them. And the burn rate of the business is fueling this car. I'm speeding towards a concrete wall. Mm-hmm. And every minute of every day, I'm questioning, will I be able to turn the car in time to avoid hitting that wall? So yeah, it wasn't pretty, but I mean, being so rooted and so much in a position of service, and it was so hard not to try to, figure your way through it when, again, you have such an incredible community that are stepping up and supporting you. Mm-hmm. If we had, 80% asked for refunds, maybe I would have been like, forget it. You know what? Forget these people, forget this business. I'm moving back into e-commerce, selling widgets on Amazon or something like that. But, again, because I'm very grateful for who we serve. I mean, I said it in conversation with one of my team members recently that like, I want to grow old with these people, regardless of like the context of MMT. Like, you will be in my life forever, and a lot of people in the community will be in my life forever. We'll go through different journeys and transitions, whatever the case may be. And for me, it's the glue that brings a lot of us together once a year. And I didn't tell you this. And I don't know if you want to dig into it. I'm an open book, but there was a company that was trying to acquire us in the midst of the pandemic, and we turned it down, which is something I haven't shared anywhere. But I will be sharing with the community probably at our next event. So yeah.
Wow, it speaks so much to your integrity and what you do, and I'm glad we are where we are today, and I'm looking forward to the next one. We're talking about a wall. Remind me of a joke that my grandfather used to say, that there is an old man praying at the Western Wall in Jerusalem. And he's praying, and he's been praying there for decades. And then the journalist comes and says, sir, sorry for disturbing you, but I see you praying, and you're praying every year for many years. He said, yes. And he said, what are you praying for? He said, I'm praying for peace in the world. And the journalist said, and how do you feel when you see the situation in the world today? He that I feel I'm praying to a fucking wall. So what is Jayson Gaignard aspiration, not for the world, but for your world? Because I do believe that the change starts with oneself and the people that you can impact, which is, first of all, your small world, if I may talk like that. But that's how I think that the difference can be made. So what is your aspiration for your world in the next years?
I guess what's coming to me is the thought of like, what are some of the things I'm trying to teach my daughter? Because that's my legacy, right? Mm-hmm. Is my daughter. It's nothing else. I love the work that I do. All the thank you cards and all that kind of stuff is fantastic. But on my deathbed, it's thinking about her, and did I set her up for success? And did yeah. And I think of trying to instill, just thoughtfulness and kindness and grace and critical thinking is also something. We started, she's 9, and we started to make a daily practice of engaging in debates. And I think critical thinking is lacking in society. Those are some things that I'm trying to instill in her, and ultimately, I hope kind of rubs off on others, so to speak.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I like that very much as well, as you might guess. Now I'm getting to the last question, and I've been asking that question, if not in the first 99 episode of the Business of Meaning podcast, but maybe 80% of the time, if not more. And you're the one with Clay Ebert that came with that question about, if we meet in 1 year with a bottle of champagne, what are we going to celebrate? And before I ask you the question, there's one question I never asked you. What is your favorite champagne brand?
So it's funny. So I tend not to drink. I don't drink. I grew up in a family of who struggled with alcohol, so to speak. So I have an interesting relationship and have avoided it almost at all costs. But I'm starting to get a little more comfortable with the idea, which is funny why I always direct this question and use champagne as the thing. The only thing I will drink from time to time is Prosecco. And that is only because, which is champagne, I think. This is how ignorant I actually, at one point in time, I had a job as a server and I was fired because I couldn't remember the alcohol brand. So all this to say, I think Prosecco is champagne. And the reason I think of Prosecco is a friend of mine, Garrett Gunderson, actually, who's part of our community and a really good friend. Our family spent time together in Italy. And that was like a practice of they drank Prosecco. So from time to time, if I'm at an Italian restaurant, Prosecco is what I'll drink. But I guess to answer your question, if we were to meet a year from today, what are we celebrating? Honestly, I was at an event last week that I mentioned, and we're still in the midst of the pandemic. We have another variant and all this kind of stuff that's taking over the news. At the event, they did rapid testing on site, and going into the event with people wearing no masks and talking and hugging was something incredibly emotional to witness, because it gave me a glimpse of what is possible for us when we do the great reunion, so to speak, in July of next year. So for me, it's just hitting it out of the park when it comes to that next live experience. I think it has a lot of healing capabilities, given the fact that we've been so socially isolated for so long. Yeah. And I've been sharpening the axe when it comes to getting better at hosting live experiences. So if all goes well, our next event is going to look nothing like the last, in the best of ways. So that's really, it's in 204 days as of today. That is 100% of my focus.
Jayson, thank you so much. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for what you and Candice and then your family are giving to all of us. Love you, man. Love what you're doing. Very inspiring time to speak with you. And I hope that all the people listening will feel that as well. And we'll learn a lot from having listened to you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for finally having me on and keeping me in the chamber, so to speak. And No, I mean, kudos to you for, 100 episodes in is quite an accomplishment. And to do it with a smile, every single one, once a week is huge. So I appreciate you and who you are and how you show up in the world, and very grateful for the opportunity to be episode 100.
Thank you. Jayson, thank you so much for sharing your story with me. Love absolutely everything you've said. It's very inspiring, and I can't wait to be live again at MMT. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to reach out to me, please go on LinkedIn or join the Facebook group www.evenbusinessformula.com/group, and hope to see you at a live event in the near future. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your network, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.